Hello guys, this is James from the cockpit of the 777 again, and I was standing here on runway 30 all ready for takeoff direction to Madrid, and before taking off I said to myself, why not recording a video on how to take off and how to configure the aircraft for takeoff. Thought that might be a good idea in order to get some things out of the way before going on to other videos. I wanted to make sure everybody watching this, well, probably everybody watching this is already familiar with flight controls and flight control systems, but I think there are people out there who, well, maybe I could give them a tip on how to configure their system. So what I want to say today is which buttons and which shortcuts on the PMDG 777 you might want to map to your flight control system. And this is all, well, actually the master question there is behind this. The question you should ask yourself in this aircraft or when you're flying any other aircraft is, let me move on to the central view of the cockpit. Maybe my head movement is annoying you. So the master question you want to ask yourself is, what keystrokes would I normally need, or what buttons or shortcuts, or what is it that I'm going to be touching around the cockpit while I'm hand flying the aircraft? Because essentially what you want to have mapped on your joystick, on your throttle, is everything that you are going to be using while hand flying. And why is that? The answer is quite obvious. While hand flying, you want to keep your hands on the controls, and you don't want to be releasing your hands from the controls, grab the mouse, touch whatever you have to touch, and in those 5 seconds you're messing around with the mouse, you might lose control of the aircraft. I mean, of course, you're not going to totally lose control of the aircraft. Recall that any aircraft you'll be flying in Flight Simulator, well, any normal aircraft, 99% of aircraft out there have to meet certain requirements of stability. That means that if the pilot releases the controls, the plane isn't going to spin in a barrel roll onto the ground and crash. That's not going to happen, but you might, I don't know, say you're doing a turn and you want to lower the gear or something like that, and during the turn you release your joystick and you might lose a couple 100 feet, which is not nice. So what is it that you're going to be using while hand flying? And I think a good exercise is to look at the controls on the real aircraft itself. So I'm going to point down here. Let me use this other view. Now this here. This is the control column of the 777, and as you can see, it has a button right there. Let me push that. That's the Autopilot Disconnect button. I'm going to, just in case I forget it, I'm going to disarm the auto throttle. So this is the Autopilot Disconnect button, and you want to have this mapped on whatever system you are using. This is how you normally disconnect the autopilot on the real aircraft. So on the real aircraft you don't go messing with the autopilot disengage bar. Normally you wouldn't touch this, or you don't go touching the autopilot. See, that's the autopilot disconnect. So apparently you can engage the autopilot on the ground, which I didn't know. So now the autopilot is engaged on the ground, and if I hit one time on the autopilot disconnect button on the yoke, I will trigger the alarm, as you have just witnessed 10 seconds before. So let me click on that. That's the alarm warning the pilots, and if you click for a second time you silence the alarm. So in real life, that's how you disconnect the autopilot. You click 2 times on the autopilot disconnect button. So next to that, this button right there, that's the trim, aircraft trim. trim up and trim. So that's trim nose down, and this is trim nose up. And as you see, I can see that reflecting on the stabilizer trim indicator right there. See that you want to have mapped to your control system as well. And here I cannot see it. Let me see if I can move my head. Alright. You can't see it, but behind the trim control there is a button which is the push to talk button for the radio, for the mic. So you want to have that mapped as well if you're flying online on IVAO or VATSIM, which I do. And on the, I'm using a Saitek X-52 system. I'm using the fire trigger for the push to talk and the capped fire button for the Autopilot Disconnect, and next to that one of the two hat switches, the upper hat switch. I'm using the up and down buttons for the trim. So that's that for the joke. Let's move on to the throttle. So what is there on the real throttle of the aircraft? On the real throttle there is an auto throttle disconnect button. There are two of them actually, one on this side, the other on the FO side. I'm gonna show you. There you see the second one, and that you want to have it mapped as well to your throttle. On my case I'm using the D button, delta button on the auto throttle. I mean on the throttle, on my hardware throttle. Okay. And this works exactly the same. You push one time, you get not a warning message, you get a caution, an amber caution message, and you push it a second time and you silence and you cancel it. Okay. So and this button over here, this is the takeoff go around button. That you want to have it mapped as well. I have it mapped to the I button, information button on my hardware throttle. That's the reason why I disarmed the auto throttle. If I click on it while it's armed, I have to go off and fly, which I want to do in a moment. But first I want to show you this. So that's that. When you takeoff go around button, you use it during standard takeoffs and during a go around. It's quite self-explanatory actually. Takeoff go around button. Now the reversed thrust, I have it mapped as well to my hardware throttle. I'm gonna show you. It's not good in the real aircraft. You wouldn't use it while standing, but just for the sake of showing it. See, it automatically deploys the spoilers, speed brake. There you see, I'm using it's nice to have an analog control set for the reverse thrust. That way you can modulate the amount of reverse thrust you're using. So, and that's basically the essentials you want to do. That's actually the controls you have on the real aircraft. But other than that, there are other flight controls you also want mapped to your control system. And I think it's quite self-explanatory. It's quite obvious. I think everybody has a button to raise or lower the gear. Let me click on that. That's the gear, toggle gear, the flaps as well. Flaps. And I'm using the slider on my throttle, hardware throttle. I'm using my slider for moving the speed brake around. It's quite nice to have an analog control for my speed brake. You can set it as desired. Okay. So that's basically all the controls I have on my aircraft. Also, I'm using the next controls I want to say is that's what I've told so far is the basic controls. Now I'm thinking, if I was hand flying, what possibly other thing would come up often that I have to do while hand flying, and I realized that that's actually three things that I would normally use during during approach or takeoff and climb out. And those three things are the checklists. So I've got that mapped as well. I've got a button for my checklist mapped on my joystick, which kind of has a double function, because first it shows up my checklist, but say I'm using another page, I can show my checklist, there it is, and then shut it up and turn the multifunction display off. So it's nice. It's a nice shortcut to have assigned on your joystick right there. Okay, and a recall button is also nice to have assigned. So I have a recall. There you see I'm touching my recall, cancel recall. On the 767 it's two buttons, a cancel button and a recall button. On the 777 it's the same button, recall. There it is. And the last key I'm using is my master caution key. There you see, it's getting dark outside, but if I move closer in, there you see the master caution. And this is important if you are going to practice emergencies. You want to be able to cancel the alarms without having to release the hand from your control. I think that's a nice shortcut to have. Let me show you. If I engage the autopilot and I disconnect it, there you see the warning, and now I can cancel it. See? So that's basically everything. That's the way I have it set up. And you have to think to yourself, not only when you're flying this aircraft or any other aircraft, you have to think to yourself, what am I possibly touching around the cockpit when I'm flying, when I hands on the controls? And everything you come up with is good. Of course, this is my preference, my setup, the way I like it. It's not mandatory. You can fly the way you like. I just think it works fine for me, and thought I might want to share it with you. So, hope you guys enjoy this, and might be recording a takeoff video now. So, see you then. Bye bye.